Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business. More on them in just a bit. The effectiveness of Hitler's Wunderwaffe, the supposedly revolutionary superweapons that were going to completely turn around Germany's late World War II woes, is a hotly debated topic. Some believe that the Wunderwaffe that did make it to production, such as the V1 and the V2, truly were game-changing weapons. Well, that game-changing, they still lost, didn't they? And if only they had been available a tad earlier and in bigger numbers, the war would have ended very, very differently indeed. Others believe that the Wunderwaffe were fantastic weapons for the Allies, as they were naught but boondoggles that ate up enormous amounts of Germany's resources for very little strategic return. One Wunderwaffe, which is less debated however, is the Bachem BA-349 Natter, nearly universally panned as an absolute heap of junk. Supposedly a joke of an aircraft with a premise so absurd that even the most ardent of Viraboo would struggle to find any redeeming qualities in it. But does it deserve this most loathsome reputation? Well, join us today as we answer that very question by exploring the development, design, and deployment history of the BA-349 and see if it really was Hitler's least wonderful wonder weapon. During the early years of World War II, the Luftwaffe was facing a major challenge from the Allied air forces, whose over-the-Reich strategic bombing campaign was reducing German cities and the vital factories inside of them to rubble. Their conventional aerial assets simply could not be produced in numbers great enough to stem this tide. So, as a result, Germany needed innovative and, above all else, cheap new technologies to regain aerial supremacy, and it needed them immediately. One potential solution that emerged was the idea of using surface-to-air missiles to shoot down enemy planes. While this approach showed some promise, the guidance and homing systems of these missiles were often crude and flawed, which prevented them from being effectively deployed. But this got people thinking, what if they already had the perfect guidance system in human beings?
Why would you do that? That's a terrible idea.
To explore this idea, the Luftwaffe put out a call for submissions for a new type of target defense interceptor in early 1944 as part of the Jagdnot program, or Fighter Emergency Program. What they wanted was a cheap and cheerful, borderline disposable aircraft which could race up to cruising altitude with great speed and take out a bomber or two, akin to an anti-aircraft missile, and then glide back down to Earth. And if they could find a way to reuse some of the expensive bits, the engine, the pilot, etc., well, even better. This was music to the ears of Dr. Erich Bachem, a former technical director for Fieseler, who had founded his own aviation company, Bachem Werke GmbH, in 1942, as he proposed a manned vertical takeoff rocket-powered interceptor all the way back in 1939. So, are you ready to take your online presence to the next level? Well, look no further than our friends over at Squarespace, the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. With customizable templates and a drag-and-drop interface, you don't need to know how to code to create a professional-looking website. You don't even need to know basic design. It'll look good anyway. Plus, Squarespace has e-commerce functionality, meaning you can easily manage your online store from product listings to payment processing to inventory management. It's all available. Also, want to connect to your audience? Well, use Squarespace's email campaigns to turn subscribers into loyal customers. And with built-in analytics, you can measure the impact of every email. You see, did someone open it? Did they click a link? All useful information. And then there's also analytics available for the website. You can see who visited, for how long, what they were up to. All great marketing information. It's like having your own little marketing team. Easy. Plus, it all connects in with social media. It's got blogging tools, everything you would expect. And maybe you're not a shop. Maybe you're looking to support your favorite cause or charity. Well, Squarespace make it easy to collect donations. They've got support for PayPal, Apple Pay, Stripe, and Venmo, so you can gather contributions for your favorite organization in just a few clicks. These are just a few of the amazing features that Squarespace has to offer. And now you can try it out for yourself with a free trial. When you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/megaprojects to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Again, don't forget to use my code MEGAPROJECTS at checkout. And thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring, and back to today's video. Back then, the Air Ministry rejected his ideas as being unnecessary, unworkable, and frankly just a little bit mad. But that was then, and this was now, and with the German war situation going rather badly, to say the least, basically any idea was now up for consideration so long as it promised results. So, Bachem duly dusted off his old plans and secured himself a healthy dose of government funding to bring his vision to life, with development starting in earnest in late 1944. So now, let's take a look at what he created. The BA-349 was constructed using largely wooden parts glued and nailed together, and it featured an armor-plated bulkhead and bulletproof glass windshield at the front of the cockpit. Originally, it was intended to be powered by, wait for it, mouthful is coming, Walter HWK 109509A2 rocket motor. But only the older 109509A1, which had been used in the ME-163, was available at the time. This wasn't a disaster, however, because the older motor still produced decent numbers, generating thrust that was variable between 100 kilograms at idle to 1600 kilograms at full power. To help with Natter's vertical launch, it was further equipped with 4 rear-mounted Schmidding SG-34 solid-fuel rocket boosters, which provided an additional 4,800 kilograms of thrust for 10 seconds before they were jettisoned. In order to achieve a stable flight, the BA-349 was launched up a 20-meter-tall, that's 66-foot vertical steel launch tower along 3 guideways, one for each wingtip and one for the lower tip of the ventral vertical stabilizer. The aircraft would slide a maximum of 17 meters, 56 feet, before leaving the tower, at which point its aerodynamic surfaces had sufficient forces acting upon them to provide stable flight. When launched, the BA-349 would be initially guided toward the attacking bombers by rudimentary autopilot, with there also being further plans to fit beam guidance similar to that of the V-2 rocket at a later date. After reaching the bombers, the pilot would then take control, aim, and fire the armament. Originally, a salvo of 55mm R4M rockets was proposed, but later 28 R4Ms or a number of larger 73mm Henschel HS-297 Fon rockets were suggested. Now, the rockets would be fired from the aircraft's nose-mounted launch tubes. The plan was for the BA-349 to fly up and over the bombers and make a one-time attack with all of the rockets. After that, it'd be out of fuel and the pilot would dive to a safe altitude of 3,000 meters or 10,000 feet, level out, and release both the nose of the aircraft and a small braking parachute from the rear fuselage. This would cause the fuselage to, of course, decelerate, and then the pilot would be ejected forward by his own inertia and land using his personal parachute. After this, hopefully, both the pilot and the fuselage could then be safely recovered. Now, this is a good time to explicitly state that the BA-349 was not a suicide weapon. The recovery of the pilot was not simply a token effort on Bachem's part, but a very real expectation, and he went to great effort to incorporate as many safety features as realistically possible into the design. Nevertheless, the idea of the BA-349 as a suicide craft still does persist in popular consensus, and as with most World War II myths, this appears to have its origins in the sloppy scholarship of the 1950s, when historians discovered an early proposal for the aircraft that featured a concrete nose intended to ram bombers. They ran with this very exciting sounding idea and paid no heed to the fact that it was totally omitted in every other proposal found. Erich Bachem himself refuted this in a post-war interview, stating that the idea of a concrete ramming nose was the suggestion of a single overly enthusiastic junior designer, and it was quickly shot down. Bachem established a factory in Waldsee to bring his vision to life and finally build the BA-349. By November 1944, the first prototype was prepared for initial tests as an unpowered glider. The aircraft was towed to an altitude of 5,500 meters, that's 18,000 feet, by a Heinkel HE-111 bomber, and then released. The pilot reported that the aircraft was easy to control, and at an altitude of 3,200 meters or 10,500 feet, he initiated the escape sequence, which worked perfectly. Now, this initial success was followed by failure when a powered vertical launch attempt on the 18th of December failed due to faulty ground equipment design. The BA-349 did finally make a successful launch on the 22nd of December, however, but with only the solid-fuel boosters as the Walter rocket motor was not yet available. Over the following months, 10 more successful launches were completed, again, just using solid-fuel boosters. Then, in early 1945, the Walter engine finally arrived, and so, on the 25th of February 1945, the Natter successfully launched with the complete propulsion system carrying a dummy pilot. The launch demonstrated that the complete concept was in fact feasible, as everything went according to plan, including the recovery of the pilot, dummy, and the Walter rocket motor. Then, with everything looking really promising, it was finally time for a true manned launch, which occurred on the 28th of February 1945, with Oberlieutenant Lothar Seibert as the pilot. After ascending the launch tower, Seibert fired the rocket engine and took off. So far, so good. Now, this good fortune did not last very long, though, as when the aircraft hit an altitude of 500 meters or 1,600 feet, it suddenly pitched into an inverted curve at an angle of approximately 30 degrees from the vertical. It then continued to climb at high speed with a 15-degree angle from the horizon and disappeared into the clouds. Then, 15 seconds after takeoff and at a height of around 1,500 meters or 4,900 feet, the rocket motor cut out, the aircraft stalled, and it entered a dive straight towards the ground, hitting it 47 seconds after takeoff, several kilometers from the launch site, completely destroying the aircraft and killing Seibert. The exact cause of the accident was not determined. Bachem himself speculated that Seibert had unintentionally pulled back on the control column due to the 3 Gs of force being exerted on him, and he fell unconscious before being able to recover. But upon inspection of the canopy found near the launch site, it was discovered that the tip of the latch was bent. So it was further speculated that it may not have been fully closed at the time of launch. The headrest of the pilot was attached to the underside of the canopy, so as the canopy detached, the sudden jolt would have caused the pilot's head to snap back about 25 centimeters or 10 inches, potentially hitting the solid wooden rear upper cockpit bulkhead, which could have caused him to lose consciousness or completely break his neck. But despite this tragedy, more pilots stepped forward to volunteer for future flights, and the Bachem team launched 3 more flights in March, all of which went off without a hitch. So, this finally meant that it was time to put the BA-349 into service. With the war in Europe mere weeks away from its conclusion, 10 BA-349s were installed at Kirchheim, just outside of Stuttgart. The pilots remained on high alert, eagerly anticipating the arrival of Allied bombers desperate to get in a quick kill with their mad little aircraft before the war's conclusion. But it was not meant to be. No Allied aircraft ever entered their range, so they sat out the rest of the war in peace, without ever launching a single combat sortie. Eventually, the US 7th Army overran the site, where they found 10 recently destroyed BA-349s and the crews who had destroyed them eager to surrender. Thus ended the history of the bizarre BA-349, the disposable plywood rocket fighter that never fired a single shot in anger and that only ever took one life, that of its own test pilot. Having now learned all about the BA-349, you may be tempted to write it off as a complete lost cause, the brainchild of a madman propped up by an increasingly desperate and crumbling Nazi state. But this would be unfair to Erich Bachem. Make no mistake, the aircraft was indeed a bit useless and a bit of a harebrained idea, but we can only make this assessment now from a position of 2020 hindsight. At the time, the aircraft was designed around some relatively sensible principles, and the logic for its deployment is simple enough to comprehend. It just turned out that it was a terrible idea. For starters, the BA-349 with its unique vertical takeoff and parachute recovery system completely eliminated the need for conventional paved runways that were very vulnerable to Allied bombing and becoming increasingly scarce as the war went on. It was also incredibly easy and simple to produce, able to be built by semi-skilled laborers in approximately 1,000 man-hours. The wings were made up of plain rectangular wooden slabs without ailerons, flaps, or other control devices. It also had some clever engineering solutions to maximize effectiveness within its simple constraints. The cruciform tail was composed of 4 fins and control surfaces, which could be deflected in various combinations to control pitch, yaw, and roll once the aircraft had achieved sufficient speed to generate adequate airflow. In addition to this, guide vanes connected to the 4 control surfaces were used to further enhance control, all positioned within the exhaust plume of the main engine for optimal performance. But on the flip side, flight training was practically impossible as the aircraft destroyed itself after each flight. However, with a typical interception lasting only 5 to 10 minutes and ground control aiding much of the flight, this problem could easily have been mitigated had the Germans used a basic ground simulator to facilitate training. But they didn't, and even if the aircraft had been produced in higher numbers, once a launch site was erected, Allied planners could have simply avoided routing bombers through the area. The accuracy of the unguided rocket salvo was also dubious, as it only provided a single-shot opportunity. But equally, credit where it's due, the BA-349's popular reputation as a death trap also appears to be grossly unfounded. Sure, it did kill one of its test pilots, but this appears to have been down to a ground crew failing, not an intrinsic flaw in the craft's design. Quite the opposite, in fact, as it seems to have been quite a nimble and handy little thing when it was in the sky, and it flew many other test flights without incident. Realistically, however, we simply don't have the evidence to render an informed verdict on the merits of the BA-349. If it had actually launched a combat sortie, even just once, we would at least then have some data to help us, and if it had then gone on to score some kills, we might even have been able to come to the verdict that it was actually a cracking little aircraft, and unlike the much hyperbolized V1s and V2s, it might actually have changed the course of the war had it been available earlier and in greater numbers, and if it had performed horribly, then we would at least have the evidence to claim that it was indeed a joke of an aircraft and Hitler's least wonderful Wonderweapon. But ultimately, we don't have this evidence, so there is little conclusion we can take away regarding the BA-349 other than to simply appreciate it as a weird little footnote in late World War II history.